Imagine standing in the absolute center of the Negev desert in Israel. The air here doesn't just feel dry, it feels ancient, as if the oxygen itself has been sitting in a vault for 10 millennia. The sun is a relentless, white-hot weight on your shoulders, and the only sound is the occasional grit of sand scraping against limestone. You're looking at a rock face, weathered and dark, and on it is a carving. It's a series of interlocking squares, nested inside one another with a precision that feels wrong. Next to it is a strange, stick-figure human with two massive circles where the shoulders should be. Now, take a breath. Blink. Suddenly you're 6,000 miles away, standing under the towering red sandstone arches of Utah in the American Southwest. The smell of sagebrush is thick in the air. You look up at a high cliff face, a spot so inaccessible it seems impossible anyone ever reached it. And there it is, the exact same pattern, the same nested squares, the same squatter man with those haunting circular joints. And no, you don't have to replay that part. It really happened. These aren't just similar artistic styles or a case of great minds thinking alike. We are talking about mathematically identical geometric configurations found in the frozen wastes of Siberia, the blistering heat of the Sahara, the remote Australian Outback, and the dizzying heights of the Andes. For nearly a century, mainstream archaeology has brushed this off with a bit of a condescending pat on the head. They called it shamanic doodling. They suggested that prehistoric humans were just high on fermented berries or hallucinogenic cacti, scribbling the phosphines they saw behind their eyelids during a trance. It's a convenient explanation, isn't it? It means we don't have to change our history books. It keeps the past neat, tidy, and safely primitive. It allows us to believe that we are the first connected generation. But as we apply modern geometric analysis, satellite mapping, and high-energy plasma physics to these sites, a far more unsettling possibility is emerging. What if these carvings weren't art at all? What if they were nodes in a forgotten, global communication system? A sort of Stone Age internet that didn't rely on fiber optics or satellites, but on a shared celestial experience and a sophisticated understanding of geometry that we are only just beginning to rediscover, to the geometry of the impossible. When we think of ancient communication, we usually think of localized tribes. We think of smoke signals on a distant ridge or runners carrying knotted strings through the mountains. We assume these people were isolated by oceans and mountain ranges they couldn't possibly cross. But the geometry tells a much louder story. It's a story written in the language of mathematics, the only language that doesn't change when a civilization falls. In the late 1990s, a new breed of researchers began noticing that certain petroglyphs weren't just drawings, they were fractals. If you look at the cup and ring marks found across Europe, Scandinavia, and the Americas, they follow a specific, rigid mathematical progression. They aren't just circles within circles, they are precise measurements of concentricity that suggest a standardized key. Take the square-in-square motif. You find it in the Karuru region of the Amazon and then again in the Val Camonica in Italy. In both places, these squares are oriented to the cardinal points, true north, south, east, and west, with a margin of error of less than 2 degrees. How does a primitive carver, in a dense, canopy-covered jungle, align a rock carving to true north with the same precision as a megalithic builder in the Mediterranean? You can't just guess true north. You need to understand the rotation of the stars, the tilt of the Earth, and the geometry of the horizon. And the traditional answer is coincidence. But let's be honest with ourselves. The odds of thousands of isolated groups independently choosing the same complex geometric abstracts and then placing them in identical geological contexts are astronomically low. If you found the same complex QR code carved on a tree in the Amazon and a skyscraper in Tokyo, You wouldn't say, "Oh, they both just liked squares." You would ask who sent the message. There is a specific type of petroglyph known as the grid variant. It looks like a hashtag or a spreadsheet. You'll find it carved into the deepest, most inaccessible parts of caves. When you overlay these grids from different continents using modern GIS software, they don't just look alike, they function as a coordinate system. Some researchers suggest these were travelers' maps, not maps of the Earth, but maps of the sky. A way to tell someone, when the stars look like this, you are here. It was a global GPS system etched into the bones of the planet. The sky as a server. To understand how a global system could work without wires, we have to stop looking at the dirt and start looking at the stars. Or more specifically, the space between the stars. There is a radical theory proposed by Dr. Anthony Peratt, a plasma physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory. This isn't a guy who spends his time looking for UFOs. He's a man who understands the raw energy of the universe. Peratt noticed something startling while conducting high-energy plasma discharge experiments, the kind of stuff that happens inside fusion reactors. When massive amounts of energy are pulsed through a laboratory, the plasma forms very specific, unstable shapes. He saw the hourglass, the ladder, and most importantly, the squatter man. He realized these shapes were identical to the petroglyphs found worldwide. His hypothesis: thousands of years ago, the Earth's magnetosphere was hit by a massive solar event, a super flare, or a coronal mass ejection of terrifying proportions. This would have caused the atmosphere to glow with intense, visible plasma discharges. High-energy shapes would have hung in the sky for weeks or months, visible from every corner of the globe. Think about the scale of that. If you were a human 12,000 years ago, and the very sky above you began to twist into geometric patterns of light, shifting, humming and glowing with a neon beauty, what would you do? You would carve it into the most permanent medium you had, stone. This explains the global nature of the symbols. Everyone was looking at the same screen. The sky was the server, and the petroglyphs were the screenshots. But it goes deeper. The geometry suggests that our ancestors weren't just terrified witnesses. They were trying to calculate. They were measuring the angles of these plasma filaments, recording the duration of the skylights, and using the geometry to predict when the fire from the heavens would return. It wasn't just art. It was a global survival manual written in the language of plasma dynamics. They were trying to save the data before the system crashed. The hard drive of the Earth. We often mock the primitive mind, yet we store our most precious data on silicon chips that would melt in a house fire or degrade in a single century. If you wanted to send a message to someone 10,000 years in the future, your descendants, or perhaps even us, how would you do it? Digital is out. Paper is a joke. Even stainless steel eventually pits and corrodes. The only medium that survives deep time is rock. But rock is heavy. You can't mail a 10-ton boulder across the Atlantic. So the system had to be decentralized. You don't send the message, you send the method. By using a universal geometric alphabet, circles, triangles, and specific ratios like the golden mean, ancient cultures ensured that any intelligent observer could boot up the information. It's the same logic we used with the Voyager Golden Record. We didn't put English on that disk, and we put the hydrogen atom. We put math. In the Australian Kimberley region, there are the Wandjina paintings. In the American Southwest, the Fremont culture left behind strange, triangular-bodied figures. When you strip away the stylistic choices of the local artists, the feathers, the colors, the tribal flair, the underlying geometry is exactly the same. A series of ratios based on the square root of 2. Square root of 2. Why that specific number? Because square root of 2 is an irrational number that governs the relationship between the side and the diagonal of a square. It's a fundamental constant of the universe. By embedding these constants into their carvings, these primitive people were signaling to us, "We know what you know." It was a handshake across time, and they were proving their scientific literacy to a future they knew would eventually learn to speak the language of math again. The network nodes and piezoelectric power. If this was a communication system, where were the hubs? You can't have a network without routers, and you can't have a broadcast without power. We've found that many of the most densely carved petroglyph sites are located at magnetic anomalies. These are places where the Earth's crust is thin, or where certain minerals create a measurable shift in the local magnetic field. Take the Gates of the Gods in Peru, a massive, ornate doorway carved into a solid rock face that leads absolutely nowhere. It's a literal dead end. But the geometry of the door is mathematically linked to sites in Egypt and Angkor Wat. And geologists have found that the rock at these sites has a high quartz content. Quartz is a fascinating material. It's piezoelectric. In simpler terms, when you put these rocks under pressure, like the pressure of a shifting tectonic plate or the rhythmic vibration of sound, they generate an electric charge. Is it possible that these carvings were actually markers for a physical network? We look at a petroglyph and see a picture, but if you have the right receiver, perhaps a specific state of resonance, a rhythmic frequency, or a now lost technology, those geometric patterns might have acted as a resonant interface. And before you think this sounds too much like a late-night sci-fi movie, consider our own modern world. If you showed a smartphone to a person from 1850, they wouldn't see a communication device. They'd see a useless piece of glass and metal. They wouldn't see the waves of data passing through the air around them. We might be looking at the hardware of an ancient global network and dismissing it as scratches on a wall, simply because we no longer have the software to run it. We're like tourists looking at a circuit board and admiring the pretty gold lines. The silent warning. There is a recurring theme in these global petroglyphs that should make us all a little nervous. The end of the cycle. In the geometry of the Hopi Prophecy Rock in Arizona, there is a line that splits into two paths. One leads to a chaotic, zigzagging geometric mess, a literal representation of noise. The other leads to a circle of harmony, a signal. The math used to define these paths is identical to the Y-split geometry found in the ancient carvings of the Canary Islands and the megaliths of Ireland. If this was a global communication system, what was the message? It wasn't, "Hello, how are you?" It seems to be a warning about stability. The ancient carvers weren't just recording the past. They were obsessed with the big clock, the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year cycle of the Earth's wobble. They used geometry to encode the dates of previous global catastrophes, floods, fires, and starfalls. By placing these identical symbols across every continent, they ensured that no matter which culture survived the next reset, the message would endure. And it was a redundant backup system for the human race. And here's the kicker. We've only recently developed the computer modeling and 3D scanning technology to read the geometry properly. For thousands of years, the message sat in plain sight, carved into mountainsides, waiting for us to become tech-savvy enough to understand it. We thought we were the first ones to build a global village. We thought we were the first ones to synchronize information across oceans. We thought we were the masters of data. But the red rocks of the desert are whispering something else. They are telling us that we aren't the peak of human achievement. We are just the latest participants in a conversation that started before the ice melted. The frequency of memory, think about the cup and ring marks again. And these are found in the thousands across the British Isles, but also in Mexico and India. When you run a sonic frequency through a plate covered in sand, a process called cymatics, you get geometric patterns. At specific frequencies, the sand forms perfect cup and ring shapes. Is it possible the communication system wasn't just visual? If these ancient sites were built on piezoelectric rock and the geometry was designed to resonate with specific acoustic frequencies, the communication might have been a physical experience, a global synchronization of human consciousness using the Earth's own resonant frequency, the Schumann resonance. Our ancestors may have been tuning in to a planetary broadcast. This would explain why so many ancient sites are built with such specific acoustic properties. In the Hypogum of Halsaflieni in Malta, there is a chamber that resonates at 111 Hz, a frequency that modern MRIs have shown can actually shift the human brain into a state of transcendence or deep meditation. The geometry wasn't just a picture, it was a frequency, a dial for the human mind. The modern reflection. So, where does that leave us? We can continue to view our ancestors as simple people who spent their days struggling to find food and their nights drawing on walls like children. We can stay comfortable in our belief that history is a straight line of progress, with us at the very top. Or we can accept the more humbling, more exciting reality. They were mathematicians of the highest order. They were astronomers who tracked cycles we are only just rediscovering. And they were part of a global collective that understood the earth and the sky in ways we are only now beginning to grasp through the lens of quantum physics and plasma dynamics. The hidden geometry isn't just a curiosity for archaeologists, it's a mirror. It forces us to ask, if they had a global communication system that didn't require electricity, satellites, or a monthly subscription, what else did they have? And more importantly, what did they lose? As we look at the QR codes of the ancient world, perhaps it's time we stop trying to interpret them as art and start trying to listen to them as data. Because the grid is still there, the geometry is still perfect, the rocks haven't moved, and the message, well, the message might be that the end of the world they were so worried about isn't a single event in the past. It's a cycle, a scheduled maintenance of the planet. And according to the geometry, according to the math they left behind in the Negev, in Utah, and in the Sahara, the clock is still ticking. Maybe we've been the ones living in the dark. Maybe we are the ones who are unplugged. It's time we look at the stone and finally hit refresh. We might not like what the download tells us about our future, but at least we'll finally be part of the conversation again. The ancestors are still broadcasting. The question is, are we finally ready to receive?